This is the Domestic Draft Podcast. I'm Evan Bierman
Man.
here with Dan Slowick. It's going to be a great show today. We're going to be recapping the fantasy football season with a very special guest. Dan, why don't you start it off? What are you drinking, man?
I've never heard of this brewery, Kensington Brewing Company, here in San Diego, out of the Kensington neighborhood, which is kind of over by San Diego State University, or right past Normal Heights, if you're familiar with the area. But it was co-founded in 2012 by friends and USD alums, Zach Knipe and Andy Rogers. And the abbreviation is kind of what they go by, KBC. It started a small scale operation in a garage, and then it kind of ballooned into a family affair. Zach's cousin is the head brewmaster there, and the father you could often find behind the bar bartending. A cool thing I saw about their company as well is they give a 1% of their profits back to community initiatives, organizations, and fundraisers. The beer I'm drinking is an apricot wheat, very light, 3.5 on Untapped, a very easy drinking beer. I was drinking a lot of IPAs back home in Chicago the last week, a lot of heavy, like stouts. So it's really nice. Yeah, it's really nice to get back to a nice kind of like fruit wheat beer. What about you, man? What are you drinking?
Nice. So the brewery that I have here is called White Rooster Farmhouse Brewery. It's actually 5 hours south of Chicago, down by St. Louis, but it's still in Illinois. It's in Sparta, if you're familiar with the southern Illinois area. But it was founded in 2009. White Rooster is the product of 3 construction workers who were consumed in their search for the perfect beer. It started at a literal farmhouse. It quickly developed into a small batch brewery located in Sparta, mainly offering sours and other farmhouse style ales. So the beer I have here is called Au Revoir. It's gets a 4.2 on Untapped. It's 5.25%. It's pretty tart and sweet. I got it in a little domestic draft glass we got here for Christmas. So there we go.
Cheers.
Cheers. It's got some notes of honey in there too, but I thought it was a fitting beer as we say goodbye to the fantasy football season. And I think, also fitting for this occasion would be to bring on our next guest. And that is Josh Larky. He's the director of analytics at Roto Underworld and playerprofiler.com. You can find him on Twitter at JLarkyTweets and on TikTok, JLarkyTikToks. Pretty funny. Check out the TikTok. Absolutely. So Josh, thanks so much for joining us today. Notice you have a beer there yourself. What are you drinking?
Dan, Evan, thanks for having me. We're rocking with, apparently you have had this one recently. It is the AleSmith 394. I'm a San Diego guy, repping Tony Gwynn as always. I probably drink, I don't want to sound crazy because I probably drink 5 to 6 of these a week.
Enough.
There we go.
This is just very solidly in my 5 p.m. rotation. Work days finishing up. I've got 1 more hour to do some projections or rankings. And this is basically the beer of choice pretty much every day.
Hopefully you had a few of those before you did that TikTok the other day in your underwear outside. I don't know where you're at.
Oh, that was stone cold sober. Believe it or not, the big complainer for that shirtless TikTok in the snow was my girlfriend, just because she couldn't wear her gloves when filming. So the audacity of someone in a jacket and full pants to be complaining about the weather when I'm in my skivvies.
Yeah, seriously.
Didn't sit right with me.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Looked like a good time.
But so I guess the first thing that we are wondering, obviously we can see director of analytics at Roto Underworld. You player profiler. You have an R coding site. I mean, you got a lot of stuff going on here. How did you kind of get started in this space? And where did your interest in sports analytics come from?
So I would say that my initial interest was through baseball. I grew up playing baseball, loved watching baseball. I think baseball is just so much farther along than any other sport statistically. I was a huge baseball card collector, and I just loved memorizing stats on the back of the card. And I felt like with sports, it's really the best avenue for bringing numbers to life. And I would bring my baseball cards to the Padres games growing up, and you could look at a player, his stats, and you're like, wow, this guy had 30 home runs last year. And then you watch him hit a home run. And I feel like as a kid, that just leaves such an impression where it's seeing the stats, knowing what's supposed to happen, and then seeing it happen when you go to the games. There was just nothing like that. So that was kind of my initial foray into realizing, wow, I don't think there's anything that I enjoy more potentially for a job than something that's combining sports and numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Baseball is like the gold standard for statistics too. I feel like with so many different ways you can chop up the numbers.
Yeah, it makes sense that you're drinking a beer off a career high batting average for your hometown and their favorite player, Tony Gwynn.
Yeah, it just tastes better thinking of Quinn. So then I was going to say the way that I became in the fantasy football industry was actually just totally random. I like telling the story because I feel like it just shows the power of networking and why these conferences that everyone likes to poop on, why there might actually be some value in them. So when I was in grad school, I was basically just trying to figure out what I was going to do for work. I wanted to make a little money if possible, doing something with sports data. I went to the MIT Sloan Sports Analytics Conference. So grad school flew me out there and they're basically like, here you go, sir. Do some networking, do whatever.
Yeah.
And I forget what the panel was, but a panel got out late and I really wanted to go to the football analytics panel. So I get to the football analytics panel. It's like across the conference. I show up a couple minutes late. There's only like a couple seats available in the back of the room. I end up sitting down next to Matt Kelly, who started Player Profiler, who's my boss today and a really good friend of mine. And we just started chatting and he found out I was in grad school and was basically like, do you want to make a little money doing some coding for me? So that's kind of how it got started.
Wow.
Was just making a little money in grad school, some weekend coding for Matt, almost 4 years ago now. So that's how the journey began. So I got very lucky that I sat down next to him and that we struck up a conversation.
Yeah, because I was going to ask, I saw you had history doing analytics for some baseball teams as well. So there's the story right there of how you got into football. I'm really curious that you started kind of teaching almost as well with VR coding for people who want to get into this kind of career or lifestyle that you're in right now. I know nothing about coding. It's really intimidating for me. So if you want to like maybe give the pitch of what it is to somebody and probably some of our audience members as well that don't know it. So what is that rcodingsite.com that you run?
So I like what you said where you were like, it sounds intimidating.
Yeah.
Because I thought the exact same thing. I'd been told for years, oh, you want to work and you want to be an analyst, you need to code. And I was like, oh, no, I don't think you understand. I'm really good with Excel. And they would always like the people in the industry would be like, oh, that's really great. We don't care. That's not really where the future of the analytics industry is moving. And that can only get you so far. And I was just terrified to kind of, with Excel, it's very comforting. You have your spreadsheet. You can just look at everything and you're like, there it is. There's my spreadsheet. There's my numbers. And you don't have to do any coding. You're literally just inputting in numbers. So it was actually just a terrifying thing for me to try and get myself to start coding. And I felt like even when I started, like finally made the plunge, the examples in class were horribly boring. I mean, I feel like we can all harken back to like our math class days or physics, like any of those classes. And a lot of those examples are not very interesting. I'm not a stock market guy. I'm not a housing prices guy. These were the kind of data sets that I'm learning to do coding and analytics with. Not very engaging. And it was just me putting in dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of hours into sports data sets and practicing the concepts in class and trying to make it make sense with sports numbers, because I kind of knew intuitively the relationships that the numbers had. And I felt like that was a really easy way to learn. And then the pandemic hits. I'm working for the San Diego Padres. I'd been on the baseball side for another team. I was on the business analytics side for them. Turns out attendance projections and projects like that, right when COVID hits and there's going to be no fans in the stands, you get fired.
Yeah.
So I saw it like a few weeks in advance. I was like, it is coming. There is nothing for me to do. Like the well of projects was drying up. So I started developing this course because I'd always thought that one day I should make a coding course. And it was like, what better time than now? I know I'm about to get fired and you can get pretty cushy unemployment checks. So I was like, let's just take 3 months and bring that vision to life. Mm-hmm. So I essentially created the course I wish I could have taken when I was learning to code. So I teach R, which is a stats programming language. So it's not really used for anything other than stats. It's very easy to learn because of that. It's super intuitive. So like anyone that has ever used Excel, very smooth transition to R, super powerful language. And I teach people basically from the ground up. It's a several month course. And by the end of it, you can put that you're proficient in R on your resume and just generally understand how to take a data set, big, small, doesn't matter, and derive insights from it, create visualizations, do predictive modeling work on it if you want, probability simulations. I teach DFS optimization in the course for fantasy football. There's a lot of cool stuff that I do. And the data sets that every lesson is structured around are always football data. That's what's interesting to me. And I think what's more interesting to other people compared to the usual credit card fraud data, housing price data. I don't know. I'm not really like a stock bro, so I don't like the stock stuff. Yeah, we had some airline data sets.
So how do you sign up for it?
You just go to thatrcodingsite.com, the letter R, and you can buy it. Yeah, so you just download.
Just that easy.
You download like the almost 20 hours of videos that I've recorded. You download all my worksheets, lessons. So you just go through. It's kind of like a guided lesson of me screen sharing my code. You have the same code on your end, and you can kind of follow along. And I discuss very in depth exactly what I'm doing at each step. And then all 15 lessons have a corresponding worksheet where it's a few dozen practice problems to kind of help you code yourself rather than just following along. I have all the answers at the bottom of every worksheet. It's not like math class where you only get the odds. I give you every answer because I think the thing that I hated most about learning to code was like the badge of honor for earning it late at night, where the teachers go over like the easiest concepts in class. And then they're like, oh, here's your coding homework assignment. And it's like, wow, there's six topics here, 10 different keywords that you didn't go over because they're difficult. Like, thank you. They're difficult. Why am I supposed to spend 8 hours tonight on Google figuring out what to do? So I give you all the answers, I explain it. And I think that ultimately I have a much more efficient course than what's currently out there. Just as someone that had to learn to code recently enough to know what it was like, to know that it was intimidating, to understand what a sports fan like myself how I wish I could have learned. So that's essentially what this course is. So I've had, I want to say like 350 people at this point sign up, and I've only had to give one refund. So I think people like it.
That sounds fantastic, man. Congratulations. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, thanks. That is awesome. And so outside of, taking your course, what kind of advice would you give to somebody that's maybe looking to break into making fantasy football or DFS a career?
So what I tell everyone is that you have to think about what people actually want to pay money for. And I think that's a huge misconception, is that people are like, oh my God, I'm competing with thousands and thousands of people. Everyone wants to be a quote unquote analyst. And there's a lot of competitiveness
I'm on Twitter. I follow a lot of different fantasy football gurus on Twitter, honestly. And there's a lot of competitiveness. I feel like people are trying to compete.
Yeah, people want to compete.
That first person to.
And not everyone, but most people compete the wrong way. So the issue is everyone wants to be like this fantasy football content person. And they're like, I'm going to create the best articles, the best rankings, and yada, yada. Everyone's going to want to read my start sit column. And I think what they don't realize is how hard it is to make it that way. I mean, if you're just like I'm an articles guy, I'm going to do rankings. What if you have a bad year? We're just going to get fired. There's no value add there. People are going to be like, oh, this guy's rankings weren't good this year. Well, I'm not going to follow him. Or the people that it's like kind of clickbait stuff and it's really fun. And you're like, wow, this guy's Twitter's hilarious. He's got 20,000 followers. This is amazing. And then they try and monetize and people go, oh, you know what? Your Twitter posts are funny, but why would I give you $5 or $10 a month? I'll just go to the next guy. And that's what people don't realize, is that you don't want to be in that space. That is the hardest way to make it in the industry, is to be the typical content guy. Like everyone's like, oh, I'm going to be the next Matthew Berry. Matthew Berry was not trying to be Matthew Berry. It was innovative that Matthew Berry was a full-time content and rankings guy. That's not innovative anymore. What you need to do is add value. So I'm not judged by my wins and losses. So if I have a bad year, I'm not like at risk of getting immediately fired, because what I try and do is teach people how to become better at fantasy football. And I do research using my coding and analytics background to help people better understand how to draft, how to set up different strategies and execute them. And that's really where the big value add is. And other people can replicate that. If you have some type of technical skills like that, that's super important. I have a friend that does like SEO and marketing for a fantasy football company. He got a job recently. Those are the jobs that are out there.
Yeah.
There's so few people getting paid because it's like, oh, we needed this content guy. It's usually like this person adds value and people are willing to pay money because this person's actively making them better at fantasy football long term.
Yeah. Is that why because we're not on TikTok, and it's, to be honest, I feel out of touch with TikTok. I'm a little older of that generation, and I see you're on it and you're active on it. And is that kind of, are you trying to use another platform? Because I don't know if there's a lot of fantasy football people on TikTok. It seems like more of a Twitter is the space for it. So are you trying to kind of branch out? Is that a reason why you're on there doing those videos?
Yeah, I know some people that make pretty good money doing TikTok advertisements. Seems like a good place to be. It's also kind of where the young people are. So I feel like getting the next generation interested in fantasy football and like thinking long-term, like that's where like the future customer base is. These are people that we want to be playing fantasy football and engaged with it. So a few reasons like that. And then the other one is the virality of TikTok is very unique. So I have like 16,000-ish Twitter followers. I am pumped, like absolutely ecstatic. If I make a video on Twitter that gets 10,000 views, I'm stoked. And that's fewer views than I have followers. On TikTok, I have like 250 followers and I can get hundreds and hundreds of views. I have one video that I think almost hit 2,000 at one point, and then I'm getting like several X my followers and views. And that there's this interesting virality component where I've 10x'd my followers with my views on TikTok. Never would I get 150,000 views on a Twitter video. That would never happen. So I think the platform's very uniquely set up for going viral and spreading your info that way. So I think it's just worth exploring, and that it's just, I don't know, keeps me young.
Having fun.
Just like a totally different platform. So I don't put that much time or effort into it right now. It's probably put in an hour and a half a week.
Would you say you're a fantasy football influencer?
I think I'm starting to become that. It's a weird question. I don't know when that happened, when the switch happened, but I think at this point with my Twitter following and just people in the industry starting to become more aware of who I am, since there's not that many of us that are full-time, I think I'm on the precipice. So we'll see.
I got to say the first time I saw you on Twitter was somebody had reshared this big weekly thread that you do every single week. And I have to say, I read through that thing once and I was like, this is the best free resource for fantasy football that I've seen, anywhere. If you don't follow Josh, you should now, just for that, really, in my opinion. It's got snap counts, it's targets, it's got, your opinions on how, players are going to be impacted in the upcoming weeks based on injuries, and just like, any kind of information that you would need for DFS or for setting a season-long lineup. So definitely check that out and read through there. But is that like kind of your moneymaker on Twitter? Do you feel like that one is how you get your biggest draw, or what got you into starting that thread up, and how long have you been doing that for?
So that's actually a really good question, because it kind of happened by accident. I feel like this surprises people. One of the least favorite parts of my week in season is projections. It's boring as shit, to be completely honest. Like I'm just like combing through data. I'm like, which assumptions am I adjusting for these 400 players? It's very tedious. I feel like it sounds like so magical and fun to people, but at the end of the day, it's very tedious going through and basically vetting 400 guys and however many numbers that feed into all the projection stuff. It's not the most fun process in my week. And one week it's probably like a 3 to 4 hour process, but it often takes me 8 hours because I lollygag, crack a beer. All of a sudden
take the dog out. Yeah.
I walk the dog. I'm like, I'm going to make a TikTok video. It's it was such a slog. And one week I thought, you know what? I'm going to hold myself accountable. We're getting this done in 4 to 5 hours. After every single team that I did, I then posted on Twitter stuff that I learned about them as I was updating my projection assumptions. And I thought I was like keeping myself on schedule. And I didn't even look at Twitter other than I just fired off those tweets. And 3.5 hours later, or 4 hours later, when I was done with projections and done with that thread, it had like 100 retweets. And I'd never gotten that engagement on a thread before. And it was totally by accident. Like I didn't go into it like, oh, this is going to get me engagement. I honestly didn't even know if people would care or find it interesting, but I was like, this is going to be a great way to hold myself accountable. Is people like someone out there might be like, oh, he hasn't posted a team in a few minutes. What's he doing? So that ended up being just a gold mine for engagement, for getting people interested in advanced stats. And that's kind of actually like a good example of what a value add is that I can bring and that other people can bring too. And that's way more valuable than just being like, here's some start sits or rankings. Is you can read through that thread that I do each week and you're going to be better at fantasy for that week. And I try and explain kind of my thought process through a lot of it, and that you're going to improve your strategy, not just how you do in fantasy that week. So I think those are the types of things where people are willing to pay for that type of content, and people generally do. And I didn't realize it or think about it at the time, but I was essentially putting out the type of content that every site paywalls for free.
Yeah.
And I was doing it to hold myself accountable. And I was like, wow, I get more engagement on that thread weekly than any big name analyst does with any of their weekly stuff. And it's because I'm the only one that's putting out content that should be paywalled for free. And that, and
appreciate it.
That's not a good idea.
Please don't paywall it.
If everyone does that, I'm gonna have to stop doing it.
Don't do it.
Because if everyone's doing it, I'm gonna get less engagement. No one's gonna care. It's not gonna feel novel. So we'll see how long this keeps up and that no one else is doing it. But for some reason, because no one else is doing it, I get crazy engagement. I've driven a lot of subscriptions to our site. I've sold a lot of coding courses when I mention it in the thread. So it's like this total gold mine that was kind of by accident. But I think like the big lesson from it is like, it's always good to try new things. And you, like, if you see something that sticks, you have to really stick with that. And I could have been like, oh, this is kind of a big undertaking to do this thread every week. I'm not going to do it. But I think the reward of it definitely outweighs like the laziness that I have sometimes, projections or like the gear up process when I'm like, here comes a 100 tweet thread. Let's just, here we go.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate it, man. And I mean, I didn't win a championship this year. Evan didn't win a championship either. But we were close. I mean, it's really hard to do. But let's talk a little fantasy football. And I'm curious, as somebody who does like analytics and studies fantasy football, if you're playing, what is your favorite kind of scoring format? Do you do full, half, PPR? I mean, I don't think many people do standard anymore. Do you have any dog in that fight?
I play mostly PPR. I think half PPR and PPR are good. I've been enjoying, I'm in a couple of leagues where you get a half point for rushing and receiving first downs. I like that a lot. I just like rules that are predictable, where
as an analytics guy.
So I think the reason that standard scoring is starting to fade out, there's two reasons. One, people score less points.
Right.
Everyone likes fantasy points. Why are you playing a format with fewer fantasy points? The other thing, though, is that touchdowns are not very predictable. What's a lot more predictable than touchdowns would be, at least for receivers, targets and receptions. So being able to get points for receptions, you're getting points for something predictable. And then there's inherently going to be more skill in those leagues than a standard league where, yes, it's not like there's no skill in a standard league, but a huge portion of that is the luck of the touchdown. And that like, there's really no way in standard to come back from your opponent having several touchdowns. If your opponent has everyone score a touchdown, you're going to lose. But in PPR, it's really not that hard to beat someone who gets a lot of touchdowns if you have the much better usage players where all your receivers are getting 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 catches, and you're getting so many points that way. So I play a lot of PPR.
Nice.
I think the best way to do it. I'm in one league. It's probably the best would be half PPR with half points for rushing and receiving first downs. I think that's kind of the best format.
What about roster setups? I know some leagues do 2 quarterbacks, 2 flex, IDP or team defense. What's your ideal roster setup?
Are you against kickers?
I don't play with a lot of kicker leagues. I'll do as much kicker analysis as I need to based on the leagues I'm in. Did some kicker rankings and projections for the Scott Fish Bowl, which is like a big charity tournament. So that's a big deal, and the kickers were a big part of it. So I had to throw on the kicker hat and do some work there. But I really like the 2 quarterback leagues. It makes quarterback important because it's important in the NFL. So I think that's nice. And if you think about it, like if you're in a 1 QB league, that's a standard league. You basically just want running backs. No other position has any value. Then suddenly you make it half PPR or PPR. Okay, receivers come into play. Now they're starting to get important. I like tight end premium, where the tight end basically will get an extra half point per reception. And then that makes tight end important. So I like adding in the tight end premium.
I like that.
And then I like the 2 QB league, because now quarterback is suddenly important. And then if you're playing in a super flex or 2 QB league where tight ends are getting an extra half point for receptions, suddenly all 4 main positions have their own unique value and they're important. And then you can't really punt a position in your draft. And I think that is the most fun way to do it, is having there be no clear-cut strategy, and that it's really about, like, in the moment, you have to adjust on the fly and fill out your roster.
Nice.
Yeah.
Evan's our commissioner. Evan, are you listening to these?
I am.
To
Yeah.
these suggestions
these are good tips. Definitely something we'll bring up at our drafts next year. But you make a good point on changing up the settings and stuff, and different approaches that you take to these fantasy drafts. So do you have like a specific approach that you take when you're going into a draft for a season-long league, or do you kind of just let the draft come to you, like you were just saying?
I'll usually let the draft come to me, but I'll generally have some awareness based on like the scoring settings and stuff and what draft slot I'm at. I draft enough that I'm generally aware of roughly how the draft goes and what my first few rounds are likely to look like. And then I'll kind of go from there, where like if we think about this season, if I have the first pick, like obviously everyone was saying McCaffrey, the first pick. And then I usually was like, okay, I know Darren Waller and George Kittle, one of them is usually available. And I know that there's like the Justin Jefferson, Keenan Allen receivers there. So if I get the first pick, I'm like, okay, if it's a 1 QB league, I'm like, all right, I'm probably going McCaffrey and then a running back and receiver at the 2-3 turn. Gotcha. And then right there, that already sets me up where I'm like, okay, what else do I need? No longer going to think about tight end if that's my draft slot. So those are the types of things that I'll think about. But for the most part, it's just kind of in the moment trying to figure out what to do in the draft. And I feel like it's because everyone's like, how do you not have a concrete strategy? And to that, I always say, when was the last time you were in a fantasy draft and every pick in the first 5 rounds was expected?
Yeah, it went your way.
There's always 1, 2, 3, 5 people in the draft where you're like, whoa, you really reached on that guy. Or like, oh my God, you're picking right before me. This guy has fallen. You're about to get the guy that should have been taken half a round earlier. How could this have happened? Like there's always stuff like that goes on. So that's why I feel like you have to let it come to you.
Yeah. And you talked about like, oh, you reached on that. Was there a player this last draft or this season that you reached on and like hit on, and you like kind of predicted that this was going to be a breakout season, and they did? Did that come true, or was there one where you thought it was going to be and it just fell flat?
So
who are your biggest hits and misses for sure from this year?
So the 2 biggest, or actually there's probably 3 big hits, and then we'll go into the misses. The 3 big hits will probably be DeAndre Swift, Cooper Kupp, and
biggest
Leonard Fournette. So I think those were all big hits. Swift, it was basically, if you're playing in a half or full PPR league, you need Swift. The guy's a target monster. Jared Goff's immobile. He's going to have to check it down. The wide receivers on this team blow. Like, where is he going with the ball? It's going to be Swift and Hawkinson.
Hey, St. Brown, not bad, right?
No one saw that. No one saw that coming.
Really good, yeah. Like a historic season for a round 4 draft pick. So Good for St. Brown. So yeah, Swift, I was like, he's going too late. People don't realize that he's the goal line back and that like Jamal Williams has never been a starter.
Mm-hmm.
He was like a day 3 pick from maybe I think it was BYU. Like this was not a running back that people should be afraid of. So I don't know why people were so afraid of Jamal Williams. I took a lot of Swift. Cooper Kupp was basically, I couldn't convince myself in my research or read other people's research that convinced me Woods was going to outscore Kupp or Kupp was going to outscore Woods. Thought they were the same guy. They were both, I thought they were both going to crush it with Stafford. Big QB upgrade.
Yeah.
And for some
then
reason,
when you find out that they're eating breakfast together, right? And that's when I was like, boom, I'm taking this guy. That's that was my tiebreaker. Yeah.
Yeah, the breakfast didn't really sway me. What swayed me into drafting a ton of Cooper Kupp was I thought these were the same player. But for some reason, Cooper Kupp went half a round or more after Woods. So when I do tons of drafts, I was just like, wow, I'm getting so much Cooper Kupp. And that was basically just, I didn't see why Woods was going so much ahead of him. I didn't think there was any real reason. I couldn't figure that out. So got a lot of Kupp. Then the last one was Fournette. I have an unhealthy amount of Fournette. It wrecked me in the playoffs when he got injured. But with Fournette, I was like, we just saw him be the bell cow in the playoffs, even when Ronald Jones was supposedly healthy and they won the Super Bowl. And Tom Brady loves him. So why isn't the exact same thing about to happen this next year? And he's always been a bell cow every year of his career, except for early in the season when he joined the team. And then he had the high ankle sprain. But when he was healthy in the playoffs, he was a bell cow like he'd been the last 3 years. So took a lot of Fournette. That worked out pretty well.
Those are some great free. I mean, I wish I would have followed those predictions before the year. But maybe I would.
Well, we haven't gotten to the misses. So
okay.
if you were using my rankings, you didn't draft Deebo Samuel. So that's really unfortunate. Deebo Samuel had a negative average depth of target last year. He was constantly injured with a very uniquely aggressive play style. Was not necessarily a super high target share guy. I thought Lance would play a lot more than he ended up playing. So I thought rookie mobile quarterback, that is terrible for the passing offense. Brandon Ayuk was running an incredible route tree. He was getting downfield as a rookie. Ayuk's probably the number 1 there. Why do I want not the number 1 option in a rookie mobile QB's offense? Didn't have much Kittle, didn't have much Deebo. Deebo really hurt. Mm-hmm. And then the other one would be Marquise Brown. I was just like, why I don't draft guys that look like me. He's like 160 pounds. And low-ish volume offense. And Rashad Bateman was taken round 1. He's more of a proper wide receiver 1 in the NFL with his size and his production from college. First round pick like Brown. It's clear that's an indictment on Brown. He had 0 20 fantasy point games during the fantasy regular season last year. So I was like, this guy doesn't even have upside. It's because he's tiny. Didn't draft Brown. And then sure enough, the injuries to every running back happened. So I adjusted.
Right.
And I was way above consensus come draft season on Mark Andrews. So that was cool. But for some reason, I didn't think that would rub off on Marquise Brown. So missed on a couple of those guys. So you hit on some league winners, you miss on some league winning type players as well.
Happens. Right. That happens.
So what are some of the biggest takeaways we should have from this season? Going into next season, I guess lessons learned that maybe that we should.
2 losers here. Well, give us some advice going out of this season into next year.
So I think a couple of them is just how chaotic it is. And I think my fab strategy was not very good this year based on looking at what ended up happening. I spent too much of my fab too early in most of my leagues. And I think we now have this 2-year trend. The past 2 seasons have just been wrecked, not just by COVID, but by injuries. And I think that assuming that COVID is not totally, if we assume COVID is not totally eradicated come next season, I think it's gonna be very important to pace yourself with your free agent bidding or your waiver priority and to really understand just how many injuries are happening. And I think a lot of it is that these players are not able to spend as much time together. They're probably not stretching quite as much or lifting quite as much. They're probably not practicing as much. Everything is kind of tampered down a little bit due to COVID and the restrictions. Yet it's not like they're giving 80% on the field. You're going 100% on the field. So I think that's partly why there's been so many injuries the past 2 years. Is a little bit of it is like adjusting to the COVID protocols, and that it's just really tough for the players. If there's no COVID, I think the injuries will probably get a little better next year. But I still think at this point, like all these injuries have happened. It's not like these players have clean bills of health for 2022. And I think that this is kind of the new trend. I think about it sort of like in baseball. Pitchers would throw so many innings, they'd be healthy for their whole careers. And then over time, pitchers threw fewer and fewer innings. And some of it has been blamed on players throw harder than they used to. So they're getting Tommy John more. But if you think about it, like there were people that threw max effort back in the day. Like there were guys in the 50s that were known as hard throwers, and they weren't constantly getting Tommy John. So I think there's something psychological about knowing the injuries are happening. I don't quite understand it, but I feel like I can spot the trend, and it seems like injuries are up. So I think pacing yourself is important. I think not going too running back heavy is important in your draft, and saving more running back picks for a little later, knowing that they're more likely to get injured, more likely to miss more games, and that it's often difficult for us to understand the running back depth charts. And like there were so many people convinced Ronald Jones was the lead back in Tampa Bay.
You're looking at one of them.
Yeah. You total idiot. Just like I was a total idiot. I thought Zach Moss was the lead back in Buffalo.
Yeah.
I had Zach Moss well above consensus. I had Singletary below consensus. Singletary's been incredible in the fantasy playoffs. And I was like, no. Moss is bigger. Like you need this guy. He's a better receiver. It turns out Zach Moss just isn't good at football. And Singletary, he's small, he's slow. But you know what? He's actually really good at football. And that's what the Bills care about. So I look like the donkey for telling people to take Zach Moss instead of Singletary. So I think that's a situation where in these kind of ambiguous backfields, taking both guys throughout if you're doing multiple drafts, don't always assume that you know who it's going to be. And that I would have rather had a little less Fournette and a little more of like a Devin Singletary, just knowing like I'm balancing my portfolio and that I'm not getting too cocky about player evaluation because that's not my strength. I'm not an NFL scout.
Right.
Like, do I really know that Moss was better than Singletary? No, I thought he was, but I'm much more confident that the Buffalo Bills running back is going to be really good in fantasy this year. Everyone thought the Buffalo Bills running back was a trap. And I was like, no. This guy's going to be really good. And that part I got right. And those are the types of questions that I get right more often is which offense is going to be good? Do you think this position in this offense is going to score fantasy points? I'm really good at that. You guys are probably pretty good at that too. Like everyone's better at those questions than player talent questions. We're not in the coach's head. I didn't know Moss or Singletary. So I think that's a good lesson is just being aware of what we as humans and fans of the sport are better at, which is kind of the overarching themes and what we're worse at, which is in this committee backfield. I know it's going to be this guy when really we have no idea.
Yeah. Who did you like better going into this season, Sony Michel or Chuba Hubbard?
Ooh, it was pretty clearly Michel for me.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Right, Dan?
So I thought it was a much better offense.
We had a bet.
We had a bet on that. So.
Oh, really? Yeah, I really like the offense. After McCaffrey, I was not drafting Panthers at their ADP. I didn't like Moore. I didn't like Anderson. I didn't like Darnold. I hated Chuba. I hated all of them. I thought it was going to be a terrible offense. It has been a terrible offense. Everyone was so excited about Darnold. And I was like, look, Darnold's been really bad his entire career. He's also run really slow-paced offenses his entire career. It's going to be a low play volume offense, and they're going to be bad. Sure enough, pretty bad. So that's why I was not really interested in a guy like Chuba. With Michel, all I knew was that
they traded those draft picks for him too, right? For Michel.
Yeah, they traded. I forgot what the pick was. It was a pretty
4 and
late
a 6 or something like that.
It was something late, but for me, I was like, I don't think they like Darrell Henderson. They never gave him much of a workload. They didn't play him his rookie year. His second year at the start of the season before Akers hurt his ribs, Henderson was barely playing. It was basically like day one, Akers was the lead back. So I knew they didn't like Darrell Henderson. McVay, it just seemed like he was constantly finding ways to not let Darrell Henderson get a full workload. So when Michel went there, I was like, this is going to be the guy. I don't know how long it's going to take to get acclimated, but I know that Michel is just an all-around better player. based on the draft capital, based on like literally every single metric, based on the playing time. Like there was nothing. I was like, Darrell Henderson, there's no way. And Sony Michel was going so late for what I thought was at some point going to become the lead back in a very good offense. So it ended up taking longer than I expected.
Same. Yes.
But ultimately, like, I think the right guy won out with that job.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. Well, there's 1 week left and Chuba's down 16 points. He's got a shot.
Got a shot.
With a few minutes left, we just have a quick last question or two here. We are a Chicago sports podcast. The Chicago Bears, who are your favorite fantasy prospect players on that roster?
Let me pull up my stats. So I was actually just looking at them, and I couldn't believe how consolidated it's been this year. And I think it's probably going to bleed over into next year. I don't see why it wouldn't. So the two guys are Darnell Mooney and David Montgomery.
Yeah.
And I don't think they're going to have a very good offense next year.
But
I think it's going to be pretty consolidated. So I think for fantasy, Mooney and Montgomery are good players to target.
Justin Fields, quarterback.
Okay.
I Fields will probably be fine as quarterback. I expect him to go really early. I could be wrong. I think he's probably going to go where Jalen Hurts went this past year, if not a little earlier. So I think actually he'll probably go a round before or 2 rounds before Hurts, because Hurts was going like round 9. Fields will probably go 7 or 8. And I think the reason is that Fields has the job security. We all know he's going to be the quarterback next year. Whereas start of this year, there was a little bit of pessimism that Hurts would play every game. It was like, oh, they signed Minshew. Oh, they're going to get Deshaun Watson. So I think that's pressed his ADP. But I think that's kind of where Fields is going to go. I think he's going to be fine. But I think I might end up with a little more Montgomery and Mooney than others, because they've both had incredible usage this year, and they're doing just fine. It's not a sexy offense. I mean, I don't have to tell you guys, if you're Bears,
we watch it not at all. No, we watch every week.
It's not a great offense, but I mean, it's so hyper consolidated. So
what about Cole Komet? I'm interested in him because I feel like he's played better. He played better this year, a little bit in the last few weeks even. I know myself, I had Travis Kelce out due to COVID in the playoffs, and I know a lot of people were pivoting to Cole Komet at that point, and he did okay. But is he going to be somebody that's going to step it up next year, you think?
So I think there's a couple things with Komet. One of them, the guy is committing a decent amount of targets. That's good. The bad is, I think that's potentially by osmosis, where it's not like he doesn't have that much competition for targets. So that kind of worries me, that he hasn't really done that much in terms of his efficiency metrics for me to think this is some crazy efficient guy. He has to be earning more work over time. He's athletic, but not very athletic. So that's not great. Usually the difference making tight ends are a little more athletic than him. And then the thing that I think is going in his favor is, I mean, Jimmy Graham barely plays, but Jimmy Graham plays in the red zone, in the end zone. And I think getting rid of that other tight end, that's the more preferred touchdown option, can help Komet. I mean, Komet doesn't have a touchdown this year.
Yeah.
And I think it's a bad offense. Jimmy Graham, Komet's not that great. But I think if Graham is gone, then Komet's an interesting late round tight end where he can just kind of walk into work. But I think there's always going to be a capped ceiling on those guys when they're on a mediocre or bad offense. Whereas like a Dalton Schultz, it's not like Dalton Schultz has the most crazy role in the world, but he's playing on a really good offense. And that Komet's role is similar to Schultz. But the reason Schultz can pay off is that his offense is incredible. And that if he has similar stats to Komet, but he's a little more efficient and gets the touchdowns, next thing you know, like he helps you win your fantasy championship potentially. So I think Komet capped ceiling most likely. I don't like the late round tight ends on bad offenses usually, but I think he's kind of a volume play where he could sneak in like 750 receiving yards. And if he gets you like 4 touchdowns, that you're happy with rolling late round tight end with Komet.
There you have it. The Bears stink. They got 2 fantasy options in Mooney and Montgomery. Yeah. Josh, thanks so much for being here today. We really appreciate you hopping on the show. Again, this is Josh Larky. He is the director of analytics at Roto Underworld and playerprofiler.com. You can find him on Twitter at Josh Larky Tweets. That's JLARKY Tweets. And on TikTok at JLarky TikToks. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks guys.
See ya.
All right. Thanks again to our guest today, Josh Larkey. Super intelligent when it comes to fantasy football. Lot of information, a lot of details there. Go ahead and give him a follow on all of his social media platforms as well. Great guest.
Absolutely. So, we mentioned the Bears there at the end. That Bears Giants game, man. Did you watch that at all?
I did.
29-3. What a game. Look at the Bears. We
It was
trying to
pretty-
save Matt Nagy's job or what?
We talked about this last week, right? This is exactly, they're going to win out, and then everyone's going to start talking about him and how they're buying in, they're turning the corner, but no, they need to fire him. It was fun to watch the game though. My brother, my oldest brother, we were both back home, and he had Chicago's D in his fantasy football championship game. And
Oh,
they
wow.
came out and he's like, well, I forgot who he had, but he had somebody else slotted ahead of them. He's like, should I pick up Chicago's D? It's at home. It's snow game, basically. Mike Glennon's the quarterback of the Giants. So he slid him in there. And what was it? The first play of the game was like a strip sack fumble. And then Mike Glennon, like 2 interceptions. He goes 4 for 11 for 24 yards. It's probably one of the worst quarterback performances of all time. And the defense just killed him. So that was fun to watch, but it's meaningless football. The games don't matter. I mean, they need to fire everybody.
Yeah. Banged up Giants team for sure. Like you said, Mike Glennon starting awful. Saquon Barkley did go 21 carries for 102 yards on us, but they had no passing offense at all. And we just destroyed them. Robert Quinn, absolute beast of a season this guy's having. So good to see that. I mean, he was kind of a disappointment last year. So
yeah, and then he comes back and breaks the franchise record for most sacks in a year.
Yeah, incredible. Good to see that.
Richard Dent passed him up.
Yeah, I did see some things today saying that Ryan Pace might not be losing his job and that it's just going to be Matt Nagy. So keep an eye on that, I guess.
I know you would feel okay about that, but you've kind of said, Pace is drafted.
Hey, he's hit on some. I mean, his picks this year, not bad. I don't know that I would be that upset. I know Nagy needs to go. I would be 100% upset if they didn't get rid of him. If you kept Pace for another year to give him another shot, I don't know, because
that'd be his third head coach.
You're gonna have another GM walking in though, with no first round pick, and
so it's their job. Figure it out.
It just seems hard.
Trade someone, trade Khalil Mack, and somebody else for a first round pick.
Yeah, then you're walking in and messing up the locker room. I don't know. Maybe you need to do that. Maybe we just need to blow this whole thing up.
Are you worried about
out.
Messing the locker room on a team that's going to miss the playoffs again? Like, what are you worried? Like, blow it up.
Blow it up and just suck next year, and then start over the year after. Totally, we got our franchise quarterback. Okay. All right. And the last thing on the Bears, I guess, Michael Gallup tore his ACL. So now you got Godwin torn ACL, Gallup torn ACL. So 2 of the biggest free agent wide receivers. Devonte Adams likely to be franchise tagged. I was reading this week too. So now you got the best 3 wide receivers that are going to be out there. Probably not going to be. I mean, maybe you snag a guy like Gallup, like we did with Robinson coming off an ACL
it would
tear.
be very similar to what we've already done.
So we'll see if that happens. But disappointing that we might not get to see those guys for the start of the regular season next year if they are Bears. But let's move over to the Bulls.
Yeah, before we start talking about the Bulls, I found this on I was browsing Instagram. It was a really interesting would you rather. And I'm just curious of what you would say, and it has to do with basketball. So I thought I'd bring it up right here. We'll make it quick.
All right.
So would you rather? There's 2 options. Ready? Option A, and this was I saw it on House of Highlights today. Would you rather be an NBA bench warmer, getting about 4 minutes a game, averaging about 2 points a game? You got 550,000 followers on social media, and you're making 1.2 million a year. That's option A. Or would you be option B, an overseas professional? You're averaging 34 minutes a game. You're putting up 28 points a game. You got about 130,000 followers, and you're making 850K a year.
More followers and more money. Let me get that one.
And just sit on the bench?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Overseas, man. Think about how many overseas players you know right now. Probably a handful.
What if you're playing in Spain? In Barcelona?
Yeah. It would be interesting.
A nice job.
I mean, look at Matt Merton. Nobody really, he was a bench warmer for the Cubs. And then he goes over to Japan, kills it.
All right, we're bringing up Matt Merton. Let's talk about the Bulls. 8-game win streak. DeMar DeRozan, back-to-back game winners. Player of the week, not player of the month or something like that. I saw their number one top seed in the Eastern Conference. Thoughts on the Bulls, Evan?
I think it was awesome that he had, first of all, back-to-back days, game winners is in 2 different years too, which is kind of interesting there. I know we were watching that Pacers game together.
Yep.
And it was, I feel like our house of like 6 people even erupted. So I can't imagine being at that game. That had to be super fun to see that. But he's just cold-blooded, man. When he's got the ball in his hands.
Crazy.
Yeah,
when we were watching it was like,
what do
2
you do in
seconds
drive?
left, and he's like still at like half court. We're like, what is happening right now? And then he heaves it. The New Year's Eve heave is what they're calling it, and just sank it. And then the next day, like he's in the corner, pump fakes, 2 people jumping. I'm like, there's no way. And then just like drains it. It was insane. It's awesome to watch. Great team to watch. Only thing I want to ask you about is there's rumors. I saw the Athletic NBA went ahead and tweeted that Jeremy Grant is getting a lot of phone calls of the Detroit Pistons. Also said that the Pistons were really interested in Pat Williams during the draft. Does that intrigue you, trading away a Pat Williams for a Jeremy Grant?
Jeremy Grant's a great player.
Yeah.
He's way more ready than Pat Williams is. Both healthy right now. I would rather have Jeremy Grant 100%. So give me Jeremy Grant. I mean, they're both injured right now, right? But Grant will be back sooner, I believe.
Yeah.
And for a contending team like this team is number 1 in the Eastern Conference, we had Bow Sports on last week told us that they're going to be contenders this year. So give me Jeremy Grant all day. What about you?
Maybe. His game is really good. He's not as much of a post presence as I would like. He does shoot on the outside a lot. He's got touch. He's very athletic, can block a lot of shots, but to me, he's just a stretched out Derrick Jones Jr. I don't see too much difference there. He's got probably a couple more inches, a couple more pounds, but I'm looking for more of like a bigger body, a bigger enforcer come playoff time. I need somebody that could wear down other teams. I don't know. I'm iffy on it.
Like an Andre Drummond.
No, get out of here. All right. Let's go to week 18. Last week of the NFL season, and the picks are in. Last week I went 9-7. Not my best. Let's go for this week.
All right. So Saturday we got Chiefs at Broncos.
Chiefs have nothing to play for. Broncos at Denver.
All right. Cowboys at Eagles.
Eagles.
Oh man, this guy's going all contrarian picks. I think I would take Chiefs and the Cowboys on Saturday. Packers at Lions Sunday.
Packers.
Colts at Jags.
Colts.
Washington at the Giants.
Washington.
Bears at Vikings.
Bears.
Finish it out. We're 6-10 right now. Titans at Texans.
Titans.
Steelers at Ravens.
Ravens.
Bengals at Browns.
Browns.
Ooh, Bengals have been hot.
Yeah, but they already clinched. I'm thinking a lot of teams are sitting players.
49ers at Rams.
Same with this one. But let's go Rams.
Panthers at Bucks.
Bucks.
Man, the Bucks almost laid an egg against Jets there. Seahawks at Cardinals.
Cardinals.
Patriots at Dolphins.
Patriots.
Saints at Falcons.
Saints.
Jets at Bills.
Bills.
Chargers at Raiders.
Raiders.
The Raiders. Both 9-7. All right.
Shout out John Madden. Raiders.
Shout out John Madden. All right. So those are your week 18 NFL picks, and it's time to say goodbye to the waiver
wire Wednesday. Unfortunately.
Yeah, that's and fantasy football for the year is over. The Fantasy Football League of Podcasts final standings. The Budhole Podcast is our champion.
As predicted last week.
As predicted last week. They had the most points for in the league this year, so it's always good to see that. But Average Joe's second, Domestic Draft third, North Sports Podcast third, Wolfpack fifth, 2 Pointers, Paydirt Profile, Fantasy Football Schmucks, Bears Nation, Sports Dude Hines, Pigskin Party, Sports Nonsense and Whiskey on the Sticks Sports Talk down there in 13th, and Team Liddy Lads rounds it out in 14th. Thanks again to all those podcasts for playing this year. We'll definitely run this back again next year. maybe we'll play for charity or something this time.
Mm-hmm.
But that's our show this week. Thanks again to our guest Josh Larky for joining us today. For Dan Slook, I'm Evan Bierman. You've been listening to the Domestic Draft Podcast. You can find us on Twitter at Domestic Draft, on Instagram at Domestic Draft Podcast, our website domesticdraft.com, and you can watch the show on YouTube. Search up Domestic Draft, drop us a sub. Thanks again for listening. Cheers.
Cheers.